Welcome back to the deep dive. We're diving into money today. It's past, it's present, and maybe even getting a sneak peek into the future.
Oh, sounds fascinating.
It is, it is. And our source material this time is Nick Bhatia's book, Layered Money.
Okay,
We also have some super interesting insights from an interview with him.
great.
So we're going to explore how money has evolved
Yeah.
from, like those big, hefty medieval gold coins
Mhm.
to the digital world we live in now.
Right.
But, and here's the cool part, we're not just looking back, we're trying to look forward and see how money might transform in the future.
I like that. I like that a lot. I think that one of the most captivating things about Bhatti's approach is that he really does connect the dots between the past, present, and future of money. He argues that you can't really understand the potential of emerging technologies like Bitcoin, for instance, without first understanding the history of money.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So let's rewind the clock way back.
Yep.
Okay, so Bhattia starts with the story of the Florentine florin,
Uh-huh.
a gold coin minted in 1252. This was no ordinary coin, though. It remained incredibly stable for centuries.
Wow.
Centuries. Can you imagine? A currency holding its value for over 300 years.
That's incredible.
I mean, that's unheard of today when things change so quickly.
Yeah, I mean, that's truly remarkable.
Why do you think the florins succeeded when others failed?
Well, I think it's important to remember that the Florence success wasn't just about the gold itself.
Okay.
It was really intricately tied to the stability of the Florentine Republic itself. Their system fostered this incredible level of trust and reliability, which is crucial for any currency to thrive. Think about it, like people need to believe in a currency, right?
Right.
They need to have faith in it
Yeah.
for it to have any real value.
Exactly.
And the Florentine Republic, they created that belief through their stable system of government, their sound economic policies.
Got it. So it's more than just like the physical thing, it's about the system behind it. So as trade routes expanded across Europe, merchants ran into a problem, right? Lugging around bags of gold.
Oh, yeah.
Risky, inefficient. I can only imagine.
Yeah,
Logistical nightmares.
totally. That need for a safer, more efficient way to transact led to the rise of what Bhatia calls second layer money.
Second layer.
Yeah, second layer money. Basically, these were early forms of credit, things like promissory notes and bills of exchange, essentially IOUs backed by the promise of gold.
Okay.
So, instead of physically moving gold for every single transaction, you could use these notes as a stand-in.
That makes sense.
Oh.
But weren't they kind of trading one risk for another? With those IOUs, you're relying on somebody else to keep their word.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. You've hit upon a crucial point, which is the concept of counterparty risk.
Counterparty risk.
Yeah, so whenever you're dealing with credit, there's always this inherent risk that the other party might not fulfill their financial obligations. And this risk has only become more significant as our financial systems have grown more complex and interconnected over time. I mean, think about it. We're dealing with trillions of dollars moving around the globe electronically every single day.
Yeah.
The potential for counterparty risk is enormous.
So we're moving away from like tangible gold into this realm of promises and trust. Then Bhatia takes us into the world of bankers.
Oh, yeah.
He reveals their so-called secret power, creating money seemingly out of thin air.
It does seem magical, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like financial alchemy?
Yeah, exactly. But how does it actually work? Through like double entry bookkeeping and lending.
Right. So imagine this. A bank has a certain amount of gold in its vaults, right? They issue a loan to a merchant, let's say for 100 gold coins. Now, the merchant gets those coins, but the bank also makes an entry in its ledger crediting the merchant's account with 100 gold coins. So technically, the total amount of money in the system has now increased, even though no new gold coins were minted.
Wait, so the money supply expands just by making entries in a book?
In essence, yes. And this is what Milton Friedman famously called the bookkeeper's pen.
What?
He highlighted both the immense power and potential danger of this system. On one hand, it allows for credit creation, which can fuel economic growth.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, if it's not managed responsibly, it can lead to inflation and financial instability.
That makes sense. And this practice is called
Fractional reserve banking.
fractional reserve banking. So that's where banks only hold a fraction of their deposits in reserve.
Precisely. And they lend out the rest.
Right.
Now, initially, the gold standard did impose some discipline on this system.
Okay.
Banks couldn't just lend out more money than they had gold to back it up. But over time, particularly after the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944, governments started intervening more and more. And that link between money and tangible assets like gold started to weaken.
So if we're not tied to gold anymore, what's stopping governments from just printing money endlessly?
Well, that's the crux of the issue, and this brings us to the fragility of our current financial system.
Okay.
Bhatia argues that this shift away from tangible assets backing our money has led to a system that's incredibly vulnerable to counterparty risk and prone to, booms and busts. He uses the 2020 financial crisis as a prime example.
So how did 2020 expose the cracks in our system?
Well, when the pandemic hit, remember, and everyone started panicking,
Yeah.
banks became incredibly risk averse. They basically stopped lending to each other, even with U.S. treasuries as collateral, which are typically considered the safest assets in the world.
Really?
Yeah. And this exposed a deep-rooted problem, a lack of trust within the system itself.
So we've gone from gold coins to IOUs to a system where money is created through accounting entries.
It's mind-boggling, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you think about it.
So now we're seeing this system, while it is incredibly complex and interconnected, it's also incredibly fragile.
Hmm.
So is there a way out? Is
Yeah.
there an alternative to address these core issues of trust and stability? Bhatia seems to think so.
He does.
And that's where Bitcoin enters the picture.
Right. And it's important to note that Bhatia isn't suggesting that Bitcoin is a magic bullet or anything.
Yeah.
But he does argue that it offers a fundamentally different approach to money. And that's what makes it so intriguing. Yeah, he sees it as a potential way to address those core issues of trust and control that we've been talking about. So what do you think? Is he onto something?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, how can a digital currency solve these problems that have been plaguing, financial systems for centuries?
Right. It sounds almost too good to be true.
It does.
Yeah, but it's not about blind faith or anything like that. It's about understanding the underlying principles at play here. Remember how we were talking about counterparty risk
Yeah.
and that whole fragility of trust? Bitcoin aims to eliminate that risk completely.
Really?
Yeah, by removing the need for those intermediaries altogether. It operates on a decentralized network, meaning no single entity controls it, not even governments.
Wow. So instead of relying on, banks or governments to vouch for transactions, it's all based on this decentralized network. But
Exactly.
how does that actually work in practice?
Okay, so picture this. A digital ledger.
Okay.
But it's not stored in one place. This ledger is distributed across thousands of computers all over the world.
Okay.
Every transaction is recorded on this ledger. And the network, get this, the network verifies and confirms those transactions using cryptography.
Cryptography.
Yeah, it's like a super secure, tamper-proof system. That cryptography is what ensures the security of the whole thing and prevents any fraud.
Okay. So it's secure, it's decentralized. But what about speed? Can it really compete with, the instant transactions we're all used to with our credit cards and digital payments and things?
That's a great question. And that's where things get really interesting with Bitcoin. So the base layer of the Bitcoin network, that's designed for security and immutability. Transactions can take, around 10 minutes to be confirmed.
Okay.
But there's another layer built on top of that called the Lightning Network.
Okay.
And that's like a superhighway for Bitcoin transactions. And it allows for near instant payments with super low fees. I mean, we're talking fractions of a penny here.
So it's like having the security of Fort Knox combined with the speed of a bullet train.
That's a perfect analogy. And this speed and efficiency, I think, has the potential to revolutionize not just individual payments, but global commerce as a whole. We could be looking at a world where cross-border payments are as seamless and inexpensive as sending an email.
Yeah. That brings us to another one of Bhatia's big ideas. The potential for Bitcoin to accelerate economic activity.
Right.
Sounds counterintuitive, right? Wouldn't a fixed supply of money lead to deflation and discourage spending? People just hoard their Bitcoin, right?
That's a common misconception. Bhatia actually argues the opposite. He thinks that a finite money supply, in contrast to the inflationary environment we're so used to, would actually encourage investment in productive assets,
Okay.
rather than just hoarding cash. Think about it. If you know your money won't be devalued over time, you're much more likely to put it to work. Invested in businesses, technologies, innovations that create real value, not just stuff it under your mattress.
So it's not about hoarding, it's about putting money to work in the real economy. But we got to talk about the elephant in the room here, right?
Yeah.
Bitcoin's price volatility. It's been on a roller coaster ride over the years, dramatic highs and lows. Can a currency that fluctuates so much really become a stable store of value? Doesn't seem like it.
It's definitely a valid concern. And Bhatia acknowledges that. He argues that the volatility we've seen so far is just a natural part of any emerging asset class.
Okay.
Like, think about the early days of the internet, right? There was a ton of speculation, volatility, uncertainty. But as Bitcoin matures and as adoption grows, he expects this volatility to decrease. It's a long game, but the potential rewards could be transformative.
Okay. So we're talking about a potential paradigm shift, how we think about money, how we use it, and even how it influences the global economy. But Bhatia also dives into some even bigger questions, the geopolitical implications of Bitcoin. He even suggests that Bitcoin could challenge the US dollar's dominance as the world's reserve currency.
It's a wild idea.
What would that even look like?
I know, it's a fascinating thought experiment, right? For decades, the US dollar has reigned supreme in international trade and finance.
Right.
But imagine a world where Bitcoin, this decentralized currency, not controlled by any single nation, starts playing a more prominent role. We could be looking at a multipolar world, where power is more evenly distributed.
Wow. A world where no single currency or nation holds absolute sway. It's a pretty bold vision. And I imagine it would have huge consequences for global power dynamics. But wouldn't governments just resist this kind of shift? I mean, they've built entire systems around controlling money and monetary policy.
That's where things get really interesting. Bhatia actually argues that some nations, especially those that have, strained relationships with the U.S. or those that are just seeking greater financial autonomy, they might actually be incentivized to embrace Bitcoin. It could give them this kind of strategic advantage and allow them to operate outside the existing financial order.
So we're potentially talking about a reshaping of the geopolitical landscape. But what about the everyday person? The average Joe caught in the middle of all this? Should we all be rushing out to buy Bitcoin right now?
Well, Bhatia doesn't offer financial advice. His focus is on understanding the fundamental forces shaping our monetary future. But I think the big takeaway for all of us is to become more financially literate, understand how money works, how it's evolved, and what those potential alternatives are.
It's not about blindly following trends.
Exactly.
It's about making informed decisions.
Exactly.
Speaking of alternatives, we can't ignore the rise of central bank digital currencies. CBDCs, right?
Yeah.
So how do these fit into this evolving monetary landscape? Are they a friend or foe to Bitcoin?
Oh, that's a great question. That's one that raises some really interesting dilemmas. So Bhatia sees CBDCs as a way for governments to implement what's known as helicopter money.
Helicopter money.
Yeah, it's a term economists use to describe when governments directly inject money into the economy, bypassing those traditional banking channels.
So instead of relying on banks to lend out money, the government could just distribute it digitally to citizens?
Exactly.
That's intriguing. But wouldn't that give governments even more control over our finances?
Well, it's a double-edged sword, right? On one hand, CBDCs could offer a much greater efficiency and transparency in, let's say, government programs, potentially reducing fraud and corruption. They could also give individuals more direct access to central bank money, bypassing those commercial banks entirely.
Right.
But on the other hand, you're right, they could also be used to, monitor and control spending, potentially limiting financial freedom.
Yeah. So CBDCs could be used for good or for ill, depending on the, intentions of the issuing government.
Exactly. It's a bit like giving a toddler a hammer.
Okay.
They could build something amazing, or they could smash everything in sight.
Right. But how do CBDCs relate to Bitcoin? Are they competitors or are they complementary forces?
That's the big question. Bhatia actually sees them as distinct but potentially interacting forces.
Okay.
Bitcoin, with its decentralized nature and fixed supply, offers a hedge against inflation and government control. CBDCs, on the other hand, could offer greater efficiency and convenience within the existing financial system.
Right.
So it's possible they could coexist, with Bitcoin serving as this store of value and settlement layer, while CBDCs facilitate those everyday transactions. It's still early days, and the interplay between these two forces is something we'll have to, watch closely.
It really is. We're living through a truly fascinating period in monetary history. But with all this talk of Bitcoin, CBDCs, and the future of finance, it's easy to get lost in the abstract. What does this all mean for, the average person trying to navigate their financial lives? Should we be hoarding gold, buying Bitcoin, or just waiting to see how the whole CBDC game plays out?
I know, it's overwhelming. Those are tough questions.
They are.
And I think Bhatia's key message here is become informed, stay curious, and think critically. Don't rely on hype or sound bites. Understand the fundamental properties of money, how they've changed over time, and what the potential implications are for your own financial well-being. This is not a spectator sport.
It's about taking control of your financial destiny, rather than just being swept along by the tides of change. But all these conversations about the future of money can feel pretty abstract.
Yeah.
How do we ground these ideas in reality? What are, like, the practical implications of these potential shifts in our financial system?
That's a good point. And one of the most intriguing aspects of Bhattia's analysis, I think, is how he connects these macro trends to the micro level. He explores how the adoption of Bitcoin could reshape not just like global power dynamics, but everyday commerce as well. Imagine a world where, cross-border payments are as seamless and inexpensive as sending an email. Imagine businesses operating with greater financial efficiency without the burden of like high transaction fees or currency exchange risks. These are the tangible benefits that could drive widespread adoption.
So it's not just about, like, abstract concepts like decentralization and scarcity. It's about concrete improvements in how we transact, how we save, and how we invest. But with all the potential benefits, I imagine there are potential risks too, right?
Sure.
We talked about Bitcoin's volatility. But what about, like, the regulatory landscape? Could governments try to stifle innovation and maintain control over their monetary systems?
Absolutely. That's a concern that Bhatia addresses directly.
Yeah.
He acknowledges that governments might attempt to regulate or even ban Bitcoin. However, he believes that such efforts would ultimately be futile. He points to the internet as a prime example. Despite attempts to, control it, the internet flourished because it offered too much value to be ignored.
Right.
And he believes the same will be true for Bitcoin.
It's like trying to put toothpaste back in the tube. Once an idea or a technology gains enough momentum, it becomes almost impossible to suppress. But what about, the darker side of innovation? We've seen how technology can be used for both good and bad. Are there risks that Bitcoin could be used for illicit activities like, I don't know, money laundering or funding criminal enterprises?
That's a concern that comes up a lot, and it's an important one to consider.
Yeah.
But Bhatia argues that Bitcoin is actually less susceptible to those activities than traditional financial systems.
Really?
Yeah. Think about it. The blockchain, the underlying technology of Bitcoin, it's a public ledger,
Right.
meaning all transactions are transparent and traceable.
So it's like having this permanent record of every transaction, which makes it way harder to hide those illicit activities.
Exactly. While criminals will, always try to find ways to exploit any system, Bitcoin's transparency actually makes it less attractive for many illegal activities.
That's interesting. Okay, so we've explored the potential benefits and risks of Bitcoin. But let's shift gears for a moment. Let's talk about something that's been making headlines recently. Tether. It's a stable coin pegged to the US dollar, and there's been a lot of controversy surrounding its reserves and its potential impact on the crypto market. What's Bhatia's take on Tether? Is it a ticking time bomb, or is it just a bump in the road?
Bhatia acknowledges that there are, persistent questions about Tether's reserves and its potential impact on the market. However, he also points out that Tether's relevance is diminishing as the broader crypto ecosystem matures and we see, more transparent stablecoins emerge.
So while Tether's story is far from over, it may not be the, make or break factor for the future of crypto that some have suggested.
Exactly.
But with all these developments and potential scenarios, it's easy to get overwhelmed. What are some key takeaways for somebody who's just starting to, wrap their head around all this? What should we be paying attention to as we navigate this uncharted financial territory?
That's the big question. And I think Bhatia would emphasize the importance of developing a nuanced understanding of these issues.
Cool.
It's not about, blindly embracing Bitcoin or dismissing CBDCs outright. It's about becoming financially literate, understanding the potential benefits and risks of these emerging technologies, and making informed decisions based on your own individual circumstances.
It's about taking ownership of our financial future, rather than being passive bystanders in a rapidly changing world.
Exactly.
Bhatia's book provides a fantastic framework for thinking about these complex issues, but it's up to each of us to, dig deeper, do our own research, and decide what role these new forms of money will play in our own lives. This is a conversation that's just beginning, and it's one that we all need to be a part of.
Yeah, it really is. It feels like we're standing at the edge of a new frontier, and the possibilities are, exhilarating and a little bit daunting all at the same time.
I know what you mean. But that's what makes this whole conversation so compelling. I mean,
Yeah.
We're not just talking about, numbers and transactions. We're talking about the nature of money itself.
Exactly.
Its impact on, society, on power,
Right.
on our individual lives.
Right. And it's about questioning assumptions, challenging the status quo. Bhassia's work is a powerful reminder that money is not this, like, static concept.
Yeah.
It's constantly evolving.
Right.
And we have the opportunity to be active participants in that evolution.
But let's be honest, this whole deep dive into the world of money, it could feel like falling down a rabbit hole. We've covered everything from those medieval gold coins to digital ledgers to this potential Bitcoin-powered future. I mean, is Bhatia being overly optimistic here? Are there risks that he might be overlooking?
Well, he definitely presents a compelling case for Bitcoin, but I don't think he's naive about the challenges. He acknowledges the potential for government intervention, the need for continued technological development, and the importance of addressing concerns about, security and volatility.
And we can't forget the sheer complexity of it all. Can a decentralized digital currency really replace an entire financial system? That seems like a pretty radical transformation.
Yeah. Bhatia doesn't necessarily envision a complete overthrow of the existing system.
Okay.
He sees a more gradual evolution, with Bitcoin and traditional finance coexisting and maybe even complementing each other. Think of it like the internet.
Yeah.
It didn't just wipe out all other forms of communication overnight. It created new possibilities and gradually reshaped the landscape.
So it's not about destroying the old, but building the new, finding ways for these different systems to interact and evolve together.
Exactly. It's about finding a balance, right, between innovation and stability.
But I keep coming back to this question of what this all means for the average person. Should we be rushing out to buy Bitcoin, waiting to see how those CBDCs develop, or sticking with, the financial systems we're all familiar with? It's a tough question.
It is tough, and there's no one-size-fits-all answer. But I think Bhatia's book really equips us with the knowledge and the perspective to make informed decisions.
Yeah.
It's about understanding the potential of these emerging technologies, assessing the risks, and then deciding what role, if any, they will play in our own lives. It's about empowerment.
Taking control of our financial futures rather than just being passive bystanders.
Exactly.
I think that's one of the most valuable things we can take away from this deep dive. It's not just about Bitcoin. It's not just about CBDCs. It's not just about any specific technology.
Right.
It's about reclaiming our understanding of money and how it works, and our role in shaping its future.
Well said. I couldn't agree more.
Bhatia reminds us that money is, at its core, a belief system.
It is.
And the future of money will be shaped by the beliefs that we choose to embrace. So we've journeyed through this history of money, explored the cracks in our current system, and given a glimpse of a potential future. A future shaped by Bitcoin and other innovations.
It's been quite a journey.
It really has. What stood out to you? What questions are you left with after this deep dive?
I think for me, what's most exciting is that we're not just observers in this unfolding story. We have the opportunity to be active participants. Whether we choose to, embrace Bitcoin or engage with CBDCs or simply become more informed about the forces shaping our financial world, we have the power to influence the direction of this monetary revolution.
We do. It's a powerful thought. Well, this has been an amazing deep dive into layered money with Nick Bhatia. I highly recommend picking up a copy of his book if you want to explore these ideas further. But remember, this is just the beginning of the conversation. The future of money is still being written, and it's up to each of us to decide what role we want to play in shaping that future. Keep learning, keep questioning, and stay tuned for our next deep dive.